Plotinus Fourth Ennead, First Tractate on the Essence of the Soul, I. Introduction. Why we must define the soul. Plotinus opens with urgency. If we are to understand ourselves, the world, and our divine origin, we must understand the soul, for the soul is the bridge between the intelligible and the sensible realms. It belongs to both, but is truly at home above. But what is the soul? Is it a body? A harmony? A function? Plotinus rejects all materialistic or mechanistic definitions. The soul is not an epiphenomenon of the body, it is the cause of life. It does not arise from the body, it animates it, forms it, and governs it. Thus, he begins by distinguishing what the soul is not, before articulating what it must be. The soul is not material, but in corporeal form. Plotinus insists the soul is not body, nor composed of any bodily substance. If it were, it could not move the body, for body cannot move itself. Further, if the soul were a harmony, as the Pythagoreans suggested, it would be dependent on the body's state, but we know that the soul outlives the body and can resist bodily impulses. Therefore, the soul is incorporeal, not extended in space, not divisible, and not subject to external motion. It is a form, not a composition of parts, a substantial principle capable of life, thought, and self-motion. This is crucial. The soul is not in the body as a part is in a whole. It is present to the body as a governing presence, as an intelligible cause. 2. The soul is not an activity, but a substance. Next, Plotinus addresses the idea common in Aristotle and Stoicism that the soul is simply a set of faculties or functions: perception, reasoning, movement, nutrition, etc. He responds, this view confuses what the soul does with what the soul is. A thing's actions express its nature, but they are not its nature. The soul's essence cannot be reduced to its powers, it is a self-subsisting principle and its activities flow from that principle. If the soul were mere activity, it would vanish when it ceases to act. But the soul remains even when inactive, even in sleep, even after death. It is not a process, but a source of processes. 3. The soul is not in the body as in a space, but as presence. Here Plotinus offers one of his most subtle metaphysical points. The soul is not spatially located in the body. It is not in the head or in the heart. Rather, it is present in the body as the cause of order and life, not as one object is inside another, but as form is present to matter, or as a law is present to what it governs. In other words, the soul is everywhere in the body, but not by spatial extension, by power and influence. This is why the soul can withdraw from the body and still exist. It uses the body but is not confined to it. 4. The hierarchy of soul, individual and universal. Plotinus now asks, is there one soul, or are there many? He answers, both. There is a single world soul which animates the cosmos as a whole, and individual souls which are expressions of that soul in particular forms. The individual soul is not separate from the all, but it is distinct. It is like a ray from the sun, not severed from the source, but capable of independent presence and activity. This balances two great truths. The soul is eternally linked to its source, yet personally responsible for its own orientation and return. The soul's essence, simplicity, self-motion, vision. Finally, Plotinus turns to a positive definition. The soul is a simple, incorporeal substance whose essence is life and self-motion. It is capable of perception, discursive reason, and intellectual intuition. Above all, it is oriented toward contemplation, that is its most divine act. The soul is not composed of parts, but has levels. Its lowest part engages with the body and sensation. Its intermediate part reasons, judges, and chooses. Its highest part contemplates nous and remains always in contact with the intelligible world even when the rest of the soul forgets. This highest part is the true self, the immortal soul that never descends and always calls us upward. Conclusion. The soul as the living center of ascent. On the essence of the soul, Plotinus establishes the soul as incorporeal but present to body. Substantial, not merely active. Simple, yet capable of manifold expression. Eternal, yet engaged in time. Unified with the all, yet distinct in identity. He lays the foundation for the soul's ascent. It must turn away from its lower acts, opinion, sensation, desire, and toward its higher life and nous. In doing so, it does not become something new, it remembers what it is. This tractate is not only a metaphysical statement, it is a call to live from the soul, not merely through the body. Plotinus Fourth Ennead, First Tractate on the Essence of the Soul, I. Introduction. Why we must define the soul. Plotinus opens with urgency. If we are to understand ourselves, the world, and our divine origin, we must understand the soul, for the soul is the bridge between the intelligible and the sensible realms. It belongs to both, but is truly at home above. But what is the soul? Is it a body? A harmony? A function? Plotinus rejects all materialistic or mechanistic definitions. The soul is not an epiphenomenon of the body, it is the cause of life. It does not arise from the body, it animates it, forms it, and governs it. Thus, he begins by distinguishing what the soul is not before articulating what it must be. The soul is not material, but in corporeal form. Plotinus insists the soul is not body, nor composed of any bodily substance. If it were, it could not move the body, for body cannot move itself. Further, if the soul were a harmony, as the Pythagoreans suggested, it would be dependent on the body's state, but we know that the soul outlives the body and can resist bodily impulses. Therefore, the soul is incorporeal, not extended in space, not divisible, and not subject to external motion. It is a form, not a composition of parts, a substantial principle capable of life, thought, and self-motion. This is crucial. The soul is not in the body as a part is in a whole. It is present to the body as a governing presence, as an intelligible cause. 2. The soul is not an activity, but a substance. Next, Plotinus addresses the idea common in Aristotle and Stoicism that the soul is simply a set of faculties or functions: perception, reasoning, movement, nutrition, etc. He responds, this view confuses what the soul does with what the soul is. A thing's actions express its nature, but they are not its nature. The soul's essence cannot be reduced to its powers, it is a self-subsisting principle and its activities flow from that principle. If the soul were mere activity, it would vanish when it ceases to act. But the soul remains even when inactive, even in sleep, even after death. It is not a process, but a source of processes. 3. The soul is not in the body as in a space, but as presence. Here Plotinus offers one of his most subtle metaphysical points. The soul is not spatially located in the body. It is not in the head or in the heart. Rather, it is present in the body as the cause of order and life, not as one object is inside another, but as form is present to matter, or as a law is present to what it governs. In other words, the soul is everywhere in the body, but not by spatial extension, by power and influence. This is why the soul can withdraw from the body and still exist. It uses the body but is not confined to it. 4. The hierarchy of soul, individual and universal. Plotinus now asks, is there one soul, or are there many? He answers, both. There is a single world soul which animates the cosmos as a whole, and individual souls which are expressions of that soul in particular forms. The individual soul is not separate from the all, but it is distinct. It is like a ray from the sun, not severed from the source, but capable of independent presence and activity. This balances two great truths. The soul is eternally linked to its source, yet personally responsible for its own orientation and return. The soul's essence, simplicity, self-motion, vision. Finally, Plotinus turns to a positive definition. The soul is a simple, incorporeal substance whose essence is life and self-motion. It is capable of perception, discursive reason, and intellectual intuition. Above all, it is oriented toward contemplation, that is its most divine act. The soul is not composed of parts, but has levels. Its lowest part engages with the body and sensation. Its intermediate part reasons, judges, and chooses. Its highest part contemplates nous and remains always in contact with the intelligible world even when the rest of the soul forgets. This highest part is the true self, the immortal soul that never descends and always calls us upward. Conclusion: the soul as the living center of ascent. On the essence of the soul, Plotinus establishes the soul as incorporeal but present to body, substantial not merely active, simple yet capable of manifold expression, eternal yet engaged in time, unified with the all yet distinct in identity. He lays the foundation for the soul's ascent. It must turn away from its lower acts, opinion, sensation, desire, and toward its higher life and nous. In doing so, it does not become something new, it remembers what it is. This tractate is not only a metaphysical statement, it is a call to live from the soul, not merely through the body. Plotinus Fourth Ennead, Second Tractate, on the Essence of the Soul, 2. Introduction: How can a non-spatial soul be present in a spatial body? Plotinus begins by addressing a central paradox of the soul's nature. The soul is incorporeal, yet it is present in a body. And not just in one, the world soul is present in all things, and individual souls animate many different forms. So how can something non-local and indivisible appear to be everywhere without being divided or multiplied? This question leads Plotinus to a deep re-examination of how presence works in the intelligible realm. He must show that being present does not mean being spatially extended, that a single, undivided soul can animate multiple bodies simultaneously and wholly without fragmentation. The soul is entirely present in each body it animates. Plotinus reaffirms the soul is entirely present wherever it acts, not partially and not by being divided. This is possible because the soul is not a body and thus does not exist in space by extension. It is present by power, a kind of spiritual participation that cannot be mapped geometrically. When the world soul animates the whole cosmos, it is wholly present in every part. When an individual soul animates a body, it is entire in the whole and entire in every part. Just as light fills a room without being split, or as a melody is present in every note, the soul gives form and life without needing to be measured out. 2. Nature is the lowest activity or image of soul. Plotinus now makes a crucial distinction. Beneath soul is nature, physis, which is not a separate being, but the last, lowest activity or image of soul. It is through this nature that soul acts upon matter, shaping it into forms. Nature does not reason or perceive, but it forms, orders, and produces. It is a silent, contemplative force derived from soul and entirely dependent on it. This distinction allows Plotinus to explain how vegetation, minerals, and lifeless bodies are shaped, not by soul directly but by its lowest power, which is already turned outward toward the physical. 3. The descent of the soul is not spatial. One of the most powerful clarifications in this tractate is Plotinus' teaching that the soul's descent into the body is not a movement through space. The soul does not leave the intelligible realm in the way a body leaves one place for another. Instead, descent is a turning of attention, a change of orientation. When the soul descends, it turns away from nous, the divine intellect, and focuses on the images in matter. But it never actually leaves the intelligible world, its highest part remains anchored above. Thus, the soul is both here and there, both in time and in eternity, depending on its mode of activity. It is like a sunbeam whose tip touches the earth while its root remains in the sun. 4. The soul's image is not the soul itself. Next, Plotinus distinguishes between the true soul and its image in the realm of becoming. Just as the soul produces an image in the body, life, character, expression, it also produces a psychic trace, the part of soul that interacts with body, sensation, and temporal activity. This image can seem like the full soul, but it is only the outer expression. The true soul remains above, in the intelligible realm, contemplating and radiating. Therefore, what suffers in the world is not the true soul, but its projected image, its engaged aspect. The soul remains untouched at its center, like an actor who plays many roles without ever ceasing to be themselves. How one soul can be in many, the logic of participation. Returning to the original question, Plotinus uses this doctrine to explain how one universal soul can be present in many beings. Because soul is not divided but participated. Because its power does not diminish by being shared. Because it is present not as a part, but as form and principle. Each body does not contain a piece of the world soul. Rather, each is informed by it, illuminated by its power, like many candles lit by a single flame, each fully lit, none diminishing the source. This view preserves both unity and multiplicity without fragmentation. It is one of the core insights of Neoplatonism. Multiplicity can arise from unity without diminishing it if what is shared is immaterial and formative. 6. The soul does not change in its essence. Finally, Plotinus insists that the soul, even when it turns toward the body, does not change in its essence. It remains what it is: divine, self-sufficient, incorporeal. Its activities may vary, its images may shift, but its true being is untouched. This is the key to spiritual ascent. The soul does not need to become something new, it needs to return to what it already is. By ceasing to identify with its lower image and recollecting its source, the soul finds itself already in eternity, already in nous. This return is not a journey in space, but a movement of recollection, a change of attention, a renewal of selfhood. Conclusion: the soul is one, indivisible, and always at home in the divine. On the essence of the soul, 2, Plotinus deepens and refines his vision of the soul. It is incorporeal, indivisible, and not limited by space. It can be present everywhere without being spread out. It generates images and traces in the world while remaining anchored in eternity. It acts through nature but is not nature. It does not descend by motion but by turning attention outward. This tractate offers a metaphysics of presence without division, of unity in multiplicity, and shows that the soul, no matter how low it seems to fall, always retains its source above. Plotinus Fourth Ennead, Third Tractate on the Essence of the Soul, 3. Introduction, a defense of the soul's divine status. Plotinus begins by defending the dignity of the soul. Some thinkers, particularly certain Gnostics and dualists, claim the soul has fallen, has become defiled, and is now imprisoned in the body as a punishment. They interpret myths of descent literally and see the material world as evil. Plotinus rejects this. The soul, he insists, remains noble even when it turns outward. Its descent is not a fall but a function of its power. It governs the lower without becoming lower. Like sunlight that shines into mud without being soiled, the soul engages with bodies without losing its essence. The soul is not alien to the cosmos, it is its organizing principle. To speak of the soul as degraded is to slander divinity. Against literalism, myths as symbols of soul's activity. Plotinus confronts the tendency to read ancient myths literally. Tales of the soul falling from heaven, entering bodies as punishment, or being captured by hostile powers. He acknowledges the spiritual truth behind these stories, but insists that they must be read allegorically. The descent of the soul is a change in activity, not a physical movement. The fall is a turning away from contemplation, not a geographical drop. The soul enters a body not by leaping into flesh, but by projecting an image of itself which acts through the body. Thus, the soul is always at home in the intelligible even when it appears most entangled in matter. 2. The soul's essence remains always in the divine. Plotinus affirms that the soul, even when it engages with body and sensation, never leaves the intelligible realm. Its highest part is always united to nous. Only its power or image reaches down into the world of becoming. This is one of the central insights of Plotinian psychology. The soul does not fall in essence. It sends down a projection of itself which can become confused or entangled. But the true soul remains in the light, always accessible to memory and contemplation. Even in its most degraded state, the soul retains a thread of connection to its source. The path of return is always open because nothing essential has been lost. 3. The soul's participation in the divine order of beings. Plotinus now places the soul within the great chain of being. Above the soul are intellect and the One. Alongside it are daimons, gods, angels, and divine powers. Below it are nature, body, and matter. The soul's station is noble, it is a god among gods, and its function is to mediate between the intelligible and the sensible. It contemplates the divine and forms the world in its image. Each soul, in its proper condition, is accompanied by a guardian daimon and has access to divine guidance. Plotinus offers a vision of a hierarchically ordered cosmos filled with meaning, not chaos or alienation. To forget this is to fall into the despair of the Gnostics, who see the world as a prison. To remember it is to reclaim the soul's royal dignity. 4. The return, awakening, ascent, and recollection. The central act of the soul is return epistrophe. Plotinus emphasizes that this return is not achieved by flight from the world but by recollection of what one is. The soul must withdraw from identification with body and sensation. Cease chasing multiplicity and externality. Turn inward toward the inner light. Contemplate its own nature as a form in nous and ascend toward the One. This is not a process of distance but of intensification. The soul does not go somewhere, it becomes more fully present to itself. This return is also the work of love. The soul is drawn upward by its desire for beauty, truth, and unity. In loving the divine, it becomes divine again. The mythic language of descent, a call to discernment. Plotinus returns to the myths of ancient philosophers and poets. Tales of soul's descent, of cycles of birth, of wandering stars and punishments. He urges his readers to see their meaning without becoming trapped by imagery. These myths speak to the soul's turning away from its own nature and to the moral consequences of that turning. But they are not histories, they are psychological allegories and spiritual diagnoses. To take them literally leads to false doctrines, fear, and alienation. To interpret them rightly leads to recollection, humility, and hope. 6. The soul is not evil, its error is forgetfulness. Plotinus concludes by defending the soul against the charge of evil. The soul is not bad, it is divine. Its only error is to forget, to become absorbed in its lower activity and lose sight of its origin. But even then, the divine presence is never lost. The soul's light may be obscured, but it is never extinguished. The task is always the same, to turn inward, to remember, to ascend. Conclusion. The soul is divine, eternal, and ever-returning. On the essence of the soul, 3, Plotinus offers a ringing affirmation of the soul's dignity, freedom, and immortality. The soul does not fall but projects its power downward. It never leaves the intelligible realm, it forgets but is not severed. Myths of descent are symbols, not facts. The soul remains divine, capable of return through love and recollection. Evil arises from misidentification, not from substance. This tractate is Plotinus' spiritual manifesto. It rejects despair and dualism. It affirms that the soul, every soul, is a spark of divine light and that even in its furthest wandering, it is always held in the embrace of the One. Plotinus Fourth Ennead, Fourth Tractate, on the Problems of the Soul, I. Introduction. The soul must be known not just in essence, but in action. Plotinus opens with a premise: having shown what the soul is, we must now ask how it functions. For it is not enough to know that the soul is incorporeal, immortal, and divine, we must understand how it engages the body, how it perceives, and how it remembers. This leads to a series of problems or aporia, many of them inherited from Aristotle, the Stoics, and even common opinion. Plotinus engages these difficulties not merely to resolve puzzles, but to clarify the soul's condition, especially for the purpose of ascent. How does the soul perceive the body without being affected? One of the central puzzles is how the soul can perceive pain, sensation, or bodily conditions such as hunger, pleasure, illness without itself being altered or passive. Plotinus answers. The soul is present to the body and its image extends into the body, but it is not the body itself. It is not affected in its essence, rather, it registers the effects that occur in its extension. Think of a musician touching an instrument. The vibration is registered, but the player is not changed in essence. The soul knows what happens to the body but remains unmoved in its true being unless it chooses to identify with the body. 2. What is memory and how does the soul retain images? Plotinus next explores memory, one of the great philosophical problems. If the soul is immaterial, how does it retain impressions of past experiences, especially sense perceptions or emotions? He argues that memory belongs not to the pure soul but to the soul as associated with image, that is, the lower soul or the psychic trace that works in and through the body. This aspect of the soul retains phantasms, internal images, and can recollect them when stimulated. Memory, then, is a kind of stored vibration in the psychic field, not a literal imprint in a material substrate. Still, the higher soul, which lives in nous, does not forget. It is always present to itself. Only the descending soul, the one interacting with the body, experiences memory and forgetting. 3. Is the soul affected by passions and emotions? Plotinus affirms that the soul can seem to be affected, but only when it descends and identifies with the lower. Anger, fear, pleasure, and sorrow arise not from the soul's essence, but from its projection into the bodily life. What we call passions are mixtures of psychic image and bodily disturbance, psychosomatic episodes. They do not touch the true soul, which remains calm, centered, impassive unless it chooses to be present in the mixture and thus to suffer. This is a consistent theme. The soul suffers only through misidentification. Its natural state is clear, rational, and in communion with nous. To free the soul is to return to this state, not by destroying the passions but by disengaging from them. 4. Can the soul be split or fragmented? A further problem: if the soul seems to act differently in different parts of the body, seeing through the eyes, hearing through the ears, remembering here, forgetting there, does this imply it is divided? Plotinus replies, no. The soul is undivided, but it acts through multiplicity. Its powers are diffused, but its substance is one. Just as light can illuminate many objects without being split, the soul can animate many parts without being fragmented. The apparent fragmentation is a result of the soul's expression in body, not of its own essence. Is the soul a unity or a multiplicity of powers? Plotinus clarifies that what appears to be different powers, perception, memory, imagination, reason, are not separate parts, but functions of a single, unified being. These faculties unfold hierarchically. Imagination flows from sensation. Memory preserves impressions. Reason organizes and judges. Intellect contemplates truth directly. All of these belong to the one soul and express its different modes of engagement with the world, with itself, and with the divine. 6. The soul's lower aspect must be disciplined, not denied. Plotinus does not propose the rejection of sensation or imagination. He affirms their necessity, especially for embodied souls, but insists they must be governed by the higher reason and ultimately by the vision of nous. The soul's problems arise not from having powers, but from being ruled by the lower ones. The task is not annihilation but rehierarchization, to restore the primacy of contemplation and to place imagination and desire in service to the soul's ascent. Conclusion: the soul suffers only by forgetting itself. On the Problems of the Soul, Plotinus presents a luminous vision of the soul as impassive in essence yet able to engage the mutable, capable of perceiving, remembering, and imagining without being divided, suffering only when it forgets its true nature and identifies with the body, always capable of return by recollecting its unity, dignity, and inner light. This is a psychology of liberation. Plotinus teaches that we are not condemned to fragmentation, we suffer only when we forget the soul's freedom. And philosophy is the art of remembering who we are, recentering the soul in its natural calm, and restoring its gaze to the eternal. Plotinus Fourth Ennead, 5th Tractate, on the Problems of the Soul, 2. Introduction, clarifying the soul's embodied operations. Plotinus begins by noting the confusion among previous philosophers about how the soul functions when joined to the body. Some suggest the soul becomes a body, others say it must be affected like a body in order to perceive. Plotinus rejects both views. Instead, he insists that the soul remains immaterial and all its powers, even when expressed through the body, remain fundamentally non-physical. The body is a receptacle or instrument, but the true principle of life and cognition comes from the soul's presence and projection. This tractate explores how that projection functions, especially in sense perception, imagination, and memory. How does perception occur without the soul being affected? Plotinus affirms that the soul perceives bodily events, but not by being passively altered like a body. Instead, perception is the result of a bodily event, e.g., a vibration in the eye or ear, which produces a modification in the psychic trace, the soul's image in the body, which is then recognized or judged by the higher soul. The soul does not receive material impressions, it receives forms through its projection into the body. It is present not as a physical part, but as a form-giving power that recognizes likenesses. Thus, perception is a layered process and the soul remains impassive in its true being, only engaging with the body's experiences, not being changed by them. 2. How does the soul remember and imagine? Plotinus builds on the previous tractate's teaching. Memory and imagination are not faculties of the pure soul but of its projected image, that is, the psychic power engaged in the body. Memory stores phantasms, internal likenesses of perceptions, and retrieves them through association or desire. Imagination uses these stored phantasms to construct new forms, to simulate perception, or to replay experiences. Yet behind both is the higher soul, which can oversee, ignore, or interpret them. The rational soul is not bound by what it imagines or remembers. It can choose to turn inward, toward nous, and transcend the flux of mental images. 3. The problem of dreams. What happens in sleep? Plotinus asks, what occurs during sleep, when the senses are quiet? He explains that the soul is never inactive. Even in sleep, it may watch over the body unconsciously, be occupied with images in memory, or rise upward in pure contemplation, in the case of purified souls. Dreams occur when the imaginative power, freed from sensory input, animates stored images, often in disorder. Yet sometimes, especially in the pure soul, dreams may come from a higher source, even from divine illumination. In either case, the true soul is not dreaming. It is the image of the soul working with the residues of perception. 4. The soul's identity across time and rebirth. One of the most striking discussions here concerns the soul's identity across multiple lifetimes. Plotinus reaffirms the doctrine of reincarnation, but now with a psychological concern. How does the soul remain itself, even when passing through different bodies, forgetting past lives, or living in different circumstances? His answer is metaphysical. The soul is one and indivisible. It remains identical to itself because it does not depend on the body for its identity. Though it may forget past experiences, especially through long identification with body and passion, it never loses its essence. Some rare souls, through purification, may remember past lives. But the lack of memory does not mean lack of identity. It means the soul has not recollected itself. Why doesn't the soul always perceive the body's movements? Plotinus confronts a subtle question. If the soul animates the body, why doesn't it notice everything the body does, e.g., the growth of hair or digestion? He replies, because the ruling part of the soul only attends to what is pertinent to judgment or rational action. Lower functions are governed by the image of the soul, nature, which operates automatically. This distinction allows Plotinus to maintain that the soul is always present but not always conscious of what its image is doing. There are different levels of attention within the soul. 6. Psychic disturbances when the soul is caught in lower images. Plotinus concludes by describing how psychic imbalance occurs. When the soul becomes absorbed in images, bodily desires, or phantasms, it begins to lose touch with its rational center. It becomes confused, disordered, even unstable. But the solution is not destruction of images, it is return to self. The soul must withdraw from distraction, detach from passions, and recenter in nous. The soul is never truly damaged. It only needs to cease identifying with the noise of its lower powers and re-establish inner order. Conclusion: the soul moves through images but is rooted in the One. On the Problems of the Soul, 2, Plotinus expands his psychology into a full model of embodied spiritual life. The soul is always active but not always conscious. It perceives and imagines through projection, not through passive reception. Dreams, memories, passions all belong to the psychic trace, not the soul's essence. The soul remains identical to itself across sleep, life, death, and reincarnation. Even in confusion, the path home is always open through recollection, self-knowledge, and contemplation. Plotinus here offers one of the first true theories of consciousness, grounded not in biology but in ontology. The soul is not what it experiences, it is the light that makes all experience possible, and it can always return to its source. Plotinus Fourth Ennead, 6th Tractate on how the soul remains one while distributed in bodies. Introduction. One soul, many bodies? A problem of presence. Plotinus begins by restating the essential dilemma. The soul is one, simple, indivisible, and immaterial. Yet it is present in many bodies. Each living organism appears to have its own soul. Do these souls share a common origin? Are they really one or many? And if they are one, how is multiplicity accounted for? This is not just a technical question, it cuts to the heart of personal identity, spiritual cosmology, and the soul's relation to the divine and the world. The soul is not in space, therefore not divided by bodies. Plotinus affirms a key premise of Neoplatonic metaphysics. The soul is not in space. It is not extended, not located, and therefore cannot be cut, split, or partitioned the way bodies are. This means that when a single soul appears in many places, animating a body or being present to multiple forms, it is not divided across them. It is wholly present to each in its own way. The soul's presence is like the presence of a law or a meaning. It can be instantiated many times yet remain one and identical in itself. 2. The world soul and individual souls, a hierarchy of participation. Plotinus distinguishes between the world soul and the individual souls that proceed from it. There is a universal principle of soul, the world soul, which gives life and order to the cosmos. From this principle flow individual souls, which are not detached parts, but derivatives or expressions of the universal. This is not fragmentation. Just as a single melody can be expressed in many voices, the universal soul can give rise to distinct centers of experience, each complete in itself, while remaining connected to the source. Thus, the soul is one in being, yet multiple in expression. Each human soul has its own life, but is never separate from the divine principle of life. 3. Analogy, light, meaning, and form. Plotinus provides analogies to explain this paradox. A single light can illuminate many objects without being diminished. A single meaning can be understood by many minds, yet remains one. A single form can shape many materials while remaining unchanged. These analogies show how intelligible presence differs from physical presence. Unity is not compromised by multiplicity. In fact, true unity includes multiplicity as an expression of its abundance. This is the secret of the One's emanation. From the indivisible springs the manifold, and from the eternal flows the temporal, without loss, without rupture. 4. Each soul is whole in itself, yet related to the whole. Plotinus emphasizes that each soul is a complete being. It is not a fragment or shard of a larger entity, it is a full expression of soul nature. Yet it remains rooted in the universal soul. This allows him to say that the same soul can be present to different bodies over time through reincarnation. The many souls of living beings are distinct, yet not alienated from one another. All souls are ultimately one, not in number, but in kind, source, and direction. The unity of the soul lies not in numerical identity, but in essential oneness. Each soul is a mirror of the same principle, facing a different direction, reflecting a different part of the world. The soul's multiplicity comes from its activities, not its essence. Why then does the soul appear multiple? Because it acts in different places, projects itself into many forms, and responds to many conditions. But these activities are not its essence, they are its expressions. The soul itself remains still, unmoved, and centered like a source of light shining in many directions. The multiplicity arises in what is formed, not in the former. This is the heart of Plotinian psychology. The soul is one in being even when it seems scattered in thought, sensation, or action. To return to unity, the soul must recollect its center. 6. The return to unity, the soul's own act. Plotinus concludes by reminding us that the unity of the soul is not lost, only ignored. When the soul turns outward, it identifies with its multiplicity, with roles, bodies, feelings, and desires. But it can always return. This return is not a journey through space, but an inner recollection, the soul remembering itself as a unified presence, already at home in the divine. Thus, the soul's unity is not merely metaphysical, it is a spiritual reality which we can live by if we turn inward and upward. Conclusion: unity without division, presence without loss. On the Problems of the Soul, 3, Plotinus gives us one of the clearest articulations of non-dual multiplicity in the soul. The soul is not in space and therefore not divided by bodies. It is present wholly to each place it acts. Each individual soul is a full expression of the universal soul. Multiplicity arises in activity, not in essence. The path of the soul is not toward becoming something else, but toward remembering its unity. This teaching is not only metaphysical, it is existential. It tells us that no matter how scattered we feel, no matter how many roles or lives we live, we remain one, whole in ourselves and forever rooted in the eternal source of all soul. Plotinus Fourth Ennead, 7th Tractate, on the Immortality of the Soul. Introduction: a challenge to the soul's eternal dignity. Plotinus begins by stating the problem directly. Many deny the soul's immortality. Some claim the soul is just an activity of the body or a temporary harmony of parts. Others assert it is destroyed with the body, like vapor or breath. Such views, Plotinus declares, are rooted in ignorance of what the soul truly is. To affirm or deny the soul's immortality, one must first understand its nature. And once that is understood, that it is immaterial, self-moved, and participates in the divine intellect nous, then its eternity becomes evident. Immortality is not an added reward, it is the very condition of the soul's being. The soul is not a body, therefore not destroyed like bodies. Plotinus reiterates, the soul is not material. It has no parts, no mass, no extension. Therefore, it cannot be destroyed like a body is. By decomposition, disintegration, or collision. Everything that perishes, perishes because it is composed. It comes apart. But the soul is a simple substance. It does not depend on spatial relations or physical mixtures. It does not decay, because it was never made out of parts. Therefore, there is no mechanism by which the soul could perish. It has no vulnerability to time, age, or dissolution. 2. The soul is self-moved and thus eternal. One of Plotinus' strongest arguments follows Plato. The soul is that which moves itself. It is the origin of life and motion. But anything that moves itself must be essentially alive, and cannot cease unless it abandons its essence. The soul is not moved from without. It is the principle of motion. As long as motion and life exist in the world, so too does soul. But even if the cosmos ceased, the soul would remain because it is a timeless being, not dependent on the cosmos for its reality. 3. The soul is not an activity of the body. Plotinus now addresses a key materialist error, the belief that the soul is a function or byproduct of the body, like harmony in a lyre or light from a flame. He counters that the soul precedes the body. It forms and organizes the body. It is present before birth and continues after death. It is not altered by the body's changes, it remains the same even when the body deteriorates. Moreover, the soul can think without the body, in sleep, in trance, in death. In its purest operations, contemplation, intellectual intuition, the soul transcends all physical inputs. Therefore, it cannot be a result of the body. 4. The soul does not change and so cannot perish. All that is destroyed must undergo change. But the soul, in its true nature, is changeless. Its essence does not evolve or deteriorate, it is what it is, timelessly. Even when it descends, the soul does not alter its being. It only directs its attention outward. Its essential simplicity and selfhood remain intact. This changelessness is a hallmark of eternal realities. It connects the soul to nous and through nous to the One. Therefore, the soul cannot cease to be unless the entire intelligible order collapsed, which is impossible. The soul exists before the body, therefore not dependent on it. Plotinus reaffirms the pre-existence of the soul, another Platonic teaching. The soul exists prior to incarnation. It chooses its embodiment according to its character and needs and returns after death. This pre-existence proves that the soul is not an emergent property of the physical organism. It exists independently and enters body as a governing principle, not as a product of biological evolution. Therefore, it will also exist after the body, not as a ghost or a residue, but as its true self, restored to freedom from material constraints. 6. The soul's immortality as ethical and philosophical ground. Toward the end of the tractate, Plotinus reflects on the moral consequences of the soul's immortality. If the soul is immortal, our actions have eternal consequences. If the soul returns to the divine, then it must be prepared through purification and philosophy. If the soul forgets itself, it may wander through many lives before returning. Thus, immortality is not merely a metaphysical claim, it is a call to responsibility. We are not ephemeral, we are beings of eternity, and must live accordingly. Philosophy, for Plotinus, is the practice of immortal life. Conclusion: the soul is deathless because it is divine. On the immortality of the soul, Plotinus confirms the soul's eternal nature through a sequence of rigorous insights. It is not material and thus not destructible. It is self-moved and therefore imperishable. It is not a body, not a product, and not a harmony. It is changeless, simple, and prior to time. It is part of the divine order, eternally participating in nous. The soul does not merely survive death, it was never subject to it. Death is for bodies, for composites. The soul is life itself, the inner flame, the unshakable center of identity. What dies is only the mask. The soul remains to rise, remember, and return. Plotinus Fourth Ennead, 8th Tractate on the Descent of the Soul into Bodies. Introduction: The Scandal of Descent. Plotinus opens by naming the scandal. How can the divine soul, born of nous, lover of beauty and source of life, descend into the material world, into perishable flesh? To some, this seems an outrage, as though the soul has fallen, betrayed its nature, or been trapped by dark powers. But Plotinus responds with confidence: the descent is neither fall nor error. It is part of the eternal procession from the One, and the soul descends in accordance with its nature, not against it. This is not to say descent is without danger, the soul can forget itself. But even in descent it remains linked to the divine and can always ascend again. The soul descends by nature, not by force or fall. Plotinus teaches that the soul descends not because it is cast down, but because it is active, productive, and overflowing with life. Like its source, the One, the soul generates and gives form to lower realities. It descends as part of the chain of being from the One, to nous, to soul, to nature. Its descent is voluntary, not imposed. It sends down a projection of itself to govern bodies, but does not abandon its place above. This is key: the soul remains anchored in the intelligible realm even while animating a body. It can live in both worlds if it remembers itself. 2. Against the Gnostics, the world is not evil. Plotinus now takes aim at the Gnostics, who teach that the world is a corrupt place, the body a tomb, and the soul a prisoner of material fate. He responds: the cosmos is formed by the world soul, which is divine. The order of nature is intelligible, beautiful, and purposeful. Embodiment is not a punishment, but an opportunity for expression, growth, and eventual return. To hate the world is to misunderstand it. The soul's task is not to curse embodiment, but to govern it, learn from it, and ascend through it. 3. The soul's descent is a mode of expression, not loss. Plotinus explains that the soul does not descend completely, only a part of it, or more precisely, its image or trace, engages the body. The true soul remains in nous, always contemplating, always present to the divine. The descent is like a ray of light or a reflection in water. The soul's power reaches into the body, animates it, experiences through it, but the core of the soul is untouched. This protects the soul's dignity and explains how it can return. It was never severed, only distracted, entangled, or temporarily forgetful. 4. The soul chooses embodiment according to justice and harmony. Plotinus develops a theory of divine justice and self-chosen fate. The soul chooses its descent in accordance with its nature. Its character, choices, and tendencies determine the kind of body, life, and destiny it inhabits. The descent is part of a cosmic harmony, not arbitrary punishment. Even apparent suffering and misfortune are fitting, not in a moralistic sense, but as a mirror of the soul's condition, and as a means of instruction and purification. This is the metaphysical equivalent of karma, but framed as ontological necessity. The purpose of descent, to contemplate forms in their images. Why descend at all? Plotinus offers an answer. The soul seeks to contemplate the forms not only in themselves, but in their images, to see beauty in matter, order in becoming, and truth in time. This desire is not evil. It is part of the soul's generative nature. The world is an image of the intelligible, and the soul seeks to understand it, form it, and express its inner vision outwardly. But this must be done with care, for the soul can also become lost in the image and forget the original. Philosophy is the practice of remembering the source. 6. The soul's ascent is always possible. Even when entangled, the soul is never trapped. Plotinus insists that return is always available through detachment from lower pleasures, contemplation of the intelligible, remembrance of the soul's divine origin. The soul must turn inward, recollect its higher self, and move from sense perception to intellectual intuition and ultimately to the vision of the One. This ascent is not an escape, but a recovery, not an abandonment of the world, but a reorientation of the soul's gaze. Conclusion: descent without fall, embodiment without shame. On the descent of the soul into bodies, Plotinus offers a radical, liberating vision. The soul descends not in sin, but in generosity, to animate, order, and know. The world is not a prison, but a living image of the divine. The soul retains its link to eternity even when turned outward. Return is always possible through philosophy, contemplation, and recollection. Plotinus transforms the ancient myth of fall into a drama of procession and return. The soul comes down as a god might enter the world of images to learn, shape, and ultimately to draw the image back toward its source. The true tragedy is not descent, but forgetting. And the great salvation is not flight, but remembering who we are. Plotinus Fourth Ennead, 9th Tractate, Are All Souls One? Introduction: The puzzle of individuality in a unified cosmos. Plotinus opens by posing a deep metaphysical tension. All souls seem to share a common nature. They have the same structure, faculties, origin, and destiny. They contemplate the same forms and all come from the universal soul. But clearly, souls appear to be many with different lives, choices, bodies, and memories. So what is the truth? Are souls numerically distinct or ontologically one? Plotinus does not rush to answer. Instead, he investigates with philosophical rigor what oneness means, especially for non-material, intelligible substances. The difference between being one in kind and one in number. Plotinus distinguishes between unity in kind. Homeides: all souls have the same essential structure, just as all circles share the same form. Unity in number. Henerithmo: there is only one entity, not many. He grants that all souls are one in kind. They are all expressions of the same divine form of soul. But the question remains, is there also numerical plurality? Yes, Plotinus says, and he proceeds to show why individual souls must be distinct, despite their common source. 2. Individual souls act separately, therefore they are distinct. Plotinus argues that each soul has its own life activity, energia, makes its own choices, has its own memories, character, and destiny. If souls were numerically one, all actions and experiences would belong to a single unified life, but this clearly contradicts experience and observation. Plotinus uses an analogy. Just as each human being thinks and wills as a distinct center of activity, so too each soul is a self-subsisting agent, not a fragment, but a whole in itself, though always related to the all. 3. Unity does not require indistinguishability. Plotinus now addresses a subtle metaphysical point. Some may say that if souls share the same form, then they must be one being. But Plotinus replies, intelligible reality allows for multiplicity of the same kind without division or corruption. Just as there can be many perfect triangles without loss to the form of triangle, so too there can be many perfect souls, each participating the same form of soul yet existing as distinct realities. This preserves both unity and individuality. Unity in source and nature. Distinction in selfhood and activity. 4. The world soul and human souls, participation without confusion. Plotinus reaffirms his doctrine that there is a world soul which animates and orders the cosmos. Human souls are not pieces of it, nor splinters, nor fragments. Instead, each human soul is a complete expression of soulhood derived from the world soul but not diminishing it. Again, his favorite analogy appears. Like many flames lit from one fire, or many reflections from one light, the one nature of soul produces many beings, each with its own selfhood. The world soul is a source, not a container. V. Memory and responsibility require distinction. Plotinus now offers a powerful ethical and psychological argument. If there were only one soul, how could there be personal memory, accountability, or reincarnation? Each soul remembers its own actions, learns from its own experiences, and carries forward the effects of past lives. This implies a stable, continuous identity, which cannot be explained if there were only one universal soul. Ethical order depends on individual soulhood, not in isolation, but in personal distinctness within the divine order. 6. Why the confusion? Misinterpreting unity of form as unity of self. Plotinus explains that the confusion arises from mistaking the oneness of intelligible nature for numerical unity. Philosophers who do not distinguish these levels collapse the many into the one. But he warns intelligible entities are not bodies. They do not exclude one another spatially. They can be many instances of the same form without being parts of a larger composite. The soul, as immaterial being, allows for coexistence of unity and plurality in a way that surpasses physical categories. Conclusion: many souls from one soul, each whole, each divine. Are all souls one? Plotinus masterfully balances the unity of soul nature. All souls share one divine archetype. With the plurality of soul beings, each is a complete, self-moving, individual life. This distinction allows for ethical responsibility, spiritual diversity, personal destiny, and the soul's power to ascend or descend based on its own acts. Plotinus upholds a vision of reality that is hierarchically unified yet personally multiple, a living cosmos in which each soul is divine and yet not dissolved into the whole. To know oneself, then, is to see, I am one soul, unique, divine, self-moving, and yet never apart from the eternal soul from which I come.